we're left with two scenarios. One is that you have to take Hamas's word, and you can see why it would be plausible that of the 16 or hopefully 15 left by the end of today, they simply can't get to them, or they don't know where they are because of the level of destruction that we've seen right across the Gaza Strip. It is plausible, but it is also plausible that having given up really their only major trump card, which was the living hostages, Hamas is now falling back on its lesser cards, occasional acts of violence, and not returning.
Hamas has said it will return the body of one hostage at 6 p.m. this evening, as the week-old ceasefire with Israel appears more fragile than ever. Today, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff met Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel after more than 28 people were killed in Gaza after a flare-up in which Palestinian attack killed 2 IDF soldiers at the weekend. First then, welcome to the programme, Tim Marshall, author of Prisoners of Geography. Tim, welcome as always.
Hello there, John.
Tim, I just mentioned the fragility of the Gaza ceasefire, which is something seasoned Middle East watchers like you warned us about, even as President Trump was trumpeting what he called his everlasting peace deal last week. Now, after the public executions by Hamas and the gunfire with the IDF airstrikes reported to have killed dozens of Palestinians, does the Israeli leadership, Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet in particular, Tim, want to stop fighting and bombing? And do you believe that Hamas will relinquish its hold on Gaza?
Yes and no.
Right.
I think the Israeli cabinet would prefer, on their own terms, to stop if they believe that the whole Trump phase 1, 2, and 3 can go through. Hamas, everything we've seen at the moment, suggests they don't want to, they're not ready to surrender yet. But I agree with you that the easy bit was getting this far and the hard bit is getting to phase 2. But there's 2 things that make me think that that is still on track, despite what happened on Sunday. Sunday morning, a Hamas unit appeared out of a tunnel complex. They fired some rocket-propelled grenades at an IDF unit, killed 2, wounded several. The Israelis responded, and this is the important point, with airstrikes right across the Gaza Strip, killing, as you've said, at least 26 people. But the point is, they didn't go in anywhere on the ground. They stayed behind the yellow line. And I think that's the template they were saying to Hamas. You can do this to us. We will come in on the air. You're not going to, get to us the way that you could. That's one thing. The second thing is more important. That's the clip you played from the president of the United States when he said, I don't even know if this was the Hamas leadership would signed off on it. Now, I doubt he knows one way or the other. But what he's doing there is saying, I'm not going to let this incident derail the progress that we hope has been made. Hence, you see Witkoff and Kushner arrive and or equally important, John, tomorrow, it's still not confirmed, but it looks like Vice President Vance rocks into town. Now, the 2 previous guys are pretty tough. This guy is full on.
Right. So, again, we see when the Vice President turns up, if progress is going to be made. And meanwhile, most of Israel's dead hostages have yet to be returned by Hamas. Tim, why the delay? What is going on here? I do read that victims of the bombing are still buried beneath rubble in Gaza. But what do you think is happening?
We don't know for sure, so I think we're left with 2 scenarios. One is that you have to take Hamas's word, and you can see why it would be plausible that of the 16 or hopefully 15 left by the end of today, they simply can't get to them, or they don't know where they are because of the level of destruction that we've seen right across the Gaza Strip. It is plausible, but it is also plausible that having given up really their only major trump card, which was the living hostages, Hamas is now falling back on its lesser cards, occasional acts of violence, and not returning. I mean, you would have thought that given that the hostages were their trump cards, including the dead ones to a lesser extent, they would have kept pretty good track of them. So I think both scenarios are plausible. Now, Hamas are in Cairo today, which is interesting because Egypt may lead the International Stabilization Force if such a thing ever rocks up into Gaza. The Americans are in Jerusalem, Hamas are in Cairo. It is still on. The last ceasefire held for 2 months, and that was without the level of pressure that is on all sides in this ceasefire.
Right. Just a word on deliveries of aid, which I think seem to have picked up after that Israeli blockage in recent days. It's still way below what's needed in Gaza.
Yes.
Are we talking about Israeli blocks on the passage of aid? Are we talking about gangs seizing the aid? Are we talking about roads that are impassable, or maybe just a bit of everything?
Well, yeah, all of the above, John. There isn't enough still going in because of yesterday's incidents. The Israelis have not opened Rafah. That's the crossing at the very south onto the Egyptian border. But they have opened Karem Shalom today. This is one further, much further up the Gaza Strip, bordering Israel. They have opened Karem Shalom. That is positive. On the aid, again, this is another reason to get the international stabilization forces in as quick as possible. But first, we're going to have to wait for a United Nations Security Council resolution. And what they're doing at the moment is arguing about the wording. Not arguing, they're trying to finesse the wording of the Security Council resolution, because that will determine the scope of the force that's going to go in and the terms of engagement, which is very important. Once that's gone through, if the countries that are cited as possibly going to volunteer troops, Azerbaijan, Indonesia, even Turkey, although that's problematic, are the ones in the frame, possibly the Saudis, Egypt leading it, that can then go ahead once we get the resolution. But at the moment, I still can't see this force. I don't know who's in it, how many there are, what they're armed with. Yeah. We haven't even got to the resolution yet.
Right. I mean, there's so much to be done, not much time, as you say, Tim. And when we see, or even talk about Hamas as in some way, a homogenous body, I mean, how far is that even the case? There are armed factions, are there, that are just not under the control of Hamas commanders?
Well, certainly Palestinian Islamic Jihad are not under the control. There are one or two other lesser groups not under the control of Hamas. And then the question comes, if the command and control has broken down, you will have individual units within Hamas that either think they're not going to answer to the political leadership in Qatar, given that almost all the high command inside Gaza has been killed, and they may be operating on their own, making their own decisions, or is that the command and control has broken down. Either way, when you see these incidents, unless they're massive, I think you're going to see the Israelis breathing fire, the Americans breathing fire on the Israelis to get them not to completely end this, because this is the way ahead. Hostages returned, ceasefire holds, in stabilization force in, reconstruction begins with, as well as the building of moderate political structures. Endgame, John, statehood, trade, progress. But there is another route which they could go down.
Right, there's so many question marks at every stage you mapped out for us. Tim Marshall, always great to have you with us. Thank you so much. Now, can I welcome to Drive Aaron David Miller, who's an American former Middle East peace negotiator. Aaron, welcome.
Great to be here with you, John.
Always good to have you here. Aaron, in some ways, this may not be an answerable question, but we have now both sides saying that they're committed to the ceasefire. We're seeing some aid supplies resuming. So much depends on President Trump staying committed. I mean, do you believe he will stay the course despite the setbacks that we've seen over the weekend, with more ahead, no doubt?
I mean, look at the last 9 months. You could argue that the answer would be no. He's already added the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian, or this agreement, to the, identified it as the 8th conflict that he's resolved. And in fact, he hasn't resolved any. Azerbaijan and Armenia actually created an opening. It's really up to them to pull the wagon through. That's a question of what's important to Donald Trump, John. I mean, governing is about choosing. One of our greatest presidents, FDR, said about our undeniably great presidents, Abraham Lincoln, that Lincoln died a sad man because he couldn't have everything. And here was a guy who in 7 years accomplished an extraordinary amount with respect to the Civil War and the future of the American Republic. So that really depends on his priorities. I mean, he has demonstrated a degree of presidential resolve unprecedented in the history of the U.S.-Israeli relationship. You'd have to go back to Ben-Gurion and Eisenhower's threat, political and economic sanctions, when Ben-Gurion refused to withdraw Israeli forces from Sinai, during the British-French-Israeli effort to seize the canal and depose Nasser. No American president that I ever worked for, Jimmy Carter to Bush 43, and you could throw in Obama and Biden, who I didn't work for, has ever talked to an Israeli president the way Trump talked to Netanyahu. I mean, during that critical weekend, when he talked to Netanyahu 5 times over the phone in an effort to close this, he said, if you leave this plan, we will leave you. And I think Trump had already demonstrated in Netanyahu since January in opening a dialogue with Hamas in March, authorizing Witkoff and Kushner in Sharm last week to talk directly to Hamas, cutting a deal with the Houthis about which the Israelis learned after the fact, that he was willing to maneuver in and around Benjamin Netanyahu in ways that few presidents, I ever worked for, were willing to do. So if he brings that kind of presidential resolve, maybe there's a chance.
Right. Okay. So it's a lot about President Trump's priorities and a good deal about his character, being willing to stick to the task despite the setbacks that are bound to be still ahead. And I guess a lot depends on the people that he's playing with, Netanyahu, so much in particular. I mean, so do you judge that the Israeli leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, does mean to do all that he can do to see this ceasefire hold and make progress after that? He sounded last week, Aaron, didn't he, like a man who was beginning an election campaign.
Yeah, and I think politics basically is the prime directive of Netanyahu's world. He knows he's faced, the Knesset's back into session October 19. The key issue on the agenda is ultra-Orthodox conscription bill. The Orthodox parties are now out of the government. Netanyahu's minority government. Bezalel Smotrich and Ben Gvir want to stay in large part because they know the real prize is not Gaza. They can go on and on about resettlement, about pushing Palestinians out of Gaza. That's not what they care about. They care about the West Bank.
Yeah.
And their annexationist policies in everything but name are continuing. So Netanyahu knows sometime in 2026, government may go to term in October, maybe not. I would predict it will not. Sometime around April, May, you could have an election, maybe even before. If Donald Trump, the speech that Donald Trump made in the Knesset, only 3 presidents have ever addressed the Israeli parliament. Jimmy Carter on his way to an Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty, Bill Clinton after the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty, and Bush 43 on the 60th anniversary of Israel's independence. No American president ever gave a speech like that, which was not just pro-Israel, but pro-Netanyahu, turning to the president of the state of Israel and essentially asking him to consider a pardon for Benjamin Netanyahu. My point is, Netanyahu cannot afford to break with Donald Trump.
Yes. Yes.
And as a consequence of that fact, he will go to extreme lengths to make sure he pleases Donald Trump. And that means not going back to what you and I have witnessed over the last 2 years. The major offensive military operations, the deployment of thousands of ground forces, the artillery shelling, the airstrikes. I think we're done with that because Trump has already said the war is over. And barring some provocation from Hamas, who must also now see that the hostages were in fact a liability because they now have the freedom to move, to enter areas where the Israelis have redeployed from, and to begin to assert their political and security control.
Yes.
So they have no reason to go back to court the wrath and fury of the IDF. And Netanyahu is afraid of Trump. I think that will hold, whether you get to an end of the war in Gaza, John, answering questions of governance, security, international stabilization force. Right now, frankly, that's a thought experiment.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe a straw of optimism from you, Aaron, to cling to. But maybe another big question. There are so many big questions. You mentioned the West Bank and the fact that Israeli settlers are still moving into that territory with the connivance of the Israeli authorities, and that is going on as before. How can that be consistent with any progress further down the peace route?
It's not. It's a cognitive dissonance of the highest degree. Let's remember that Donald Trump's deal of the century back in 2020 conceded roughly 30% of what the Palestinians would consider their patrimony to Israel. I don't think Donald Trump has any intention of a two-state solution along the lines that we were debating and did debate, negotiate at Camp David 25 years ago, when in fact we were dealing with, by the end of 2000, Clinton parameters, 94 to 96% of the West Bank with swaps of equal size and value, 3/4 of the old city, Muslim and Christian quarter. Armenian quarter was up for dispute, Muslim quarter under Palestinian sovereignty, and a resolution of the refugee question and a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem. I just don't see how we get to that. You need a fundamental change in leadership. You need a Mandela de Klerk, a Begin, a Sadat, a Rabin, and a King Hussein. And I don't see that. And on the Palestinian side, let's be very clear about something. I'm not an Israeli and I don't play one on television. But if I were an Israeli and I was seriously considering making decisions on Palestinian statehood in a way that Palestinians would actually regard those concessions as creating a real state, I would demand one gun, one authority, one negotiating position. A monopoly over the forces of violence. I'm not talking about individuals with guns. We have a problem here, even with militias with guns.
Yes.
But we're talking about a degree of centralized control over the organized forces of violence within Palestinian society that Arafat actually had when we were dealing with him. He deployed violence when he wanted to and controlled it when it was in his interest. But the next step, the Palestinian leader that essentially is going to negotiate for a real Palestinian state, assuming you have an Israeli prime minister willing to go there, must have one gun, one authority, one negotiating position.
Okay.
Without that, John, you and I are going to be having this conversation for hopefully many years to come. Well, not hopefully, but years to come.
Aaron, so valuable to get your thoughts on this. I mean, you gave us a straw of optimism. There was more than a straw of pessimism, or maybe it's just harsh realism. Aaron David Miller, former US Middle East peace negotiator, thank you for joining us.